Well, I'll be with you in spirit. You know, you can send me stuff. In fact, maybe we can even get on the telephone.
You
Is
know,
it possible
it
to
costs
let you
$9
do it?
a minute to do something
How
like
about
that.
Skype? Do they have Skype?
No, they don't have any of this. Anything that goes to a satellite, they'll take from you. So, for an iPad, for instance, they won't take it. For an iPod, they won't take it. So you can play music on that because there is no hookup that you can launch it on. But cell phones, they worry about that. GPS, you really honed into that.
They don't want you to have GPS.
No, because that's anything
Tell
that
you
can
location.
anything that can get you to a satellite is beyond their control, and they don't want that.
Okay. All right. Okay. Okay, we're going to start in a few seconds here. If you want to talk to the people, just talk to that camera.
The one over here?
That one. That's your camera.
Ah, okay.
See? No.
I want to talk to the people.
Okay, here we are, ThinkTech. ThinkTech on Tuesday. ThinkTech Asia in Review on Tuesday. And we have Patrick Border with us, citizen diplomat. And the title of this show, Patrick, is Circling Back to North Korea. Thank you for coming down.
It's my pleasure all the time, and don't we find ourselves forever circling back?
In every way.
It seems to be an unending loop, but I see progress through it.
Okay, we're going to explore that. You know, this just in, breaking news. Patrick Border, going back to North Korea, your fourth time, and you have an affinity for the place. You have found something that is central in your own place in the universe. You've found it in North Korea. Tell us what that is.
Well, not every country has an evil twin. I first became enamored to the Republic of Korea when more than half a lifetime ago I was stationed there at the Kunsan Air Base in 1975. And when I went to the assignment, I thought it was a hardship, and when I left it, I didn't know what to do with myself because it had had such an impact on me. I've been going back since. I went back to the Olympics. I've been going back. I've done some lecturing at Seoul National University. The people are lovable, and when I looked at it, I always looked beyond the horizon and wondered what could be so different up on the other side. And I think the discovery that I made is that it's not that different. It is, the people are very similar. You know, during the Cuban Missile Crisis, John Kennedy, when he was addressing the Cuban situation, referred to Cuba as an imprisoned island. And I like that reference so much because what it says, in effect, is what should be obvious to all of us, and that is that for communist regimes, for totalitarian dictatorships, the people have no voice. And I think all too often we assume that the North Koreans' population is lockstep with its leadership, and they're not. From my travels back in the 70s in the old Soviet Union, I see that same kind of weariness that I saw back then of people who want to be rescued very much. And since then, of course, the Soviet Union has fallen, and I think that something, and I can't say exactly when, but at some time in the future, that same thing is going to happen to the people of the DPRK. There are many examples of the fall of bad regimes without the shedding of a lot of blood. And that's hard to imagine right now during all these Arab Spring revolts that are very bloody. But remember 1986, as I do, when it looked like there would be blood in the Philippines, and it happened quite peacefully. And it happened in a lot of the Eastern European countries.
East Germany.
After the fall, yeah, East Germany. As soon as those people saw that communism was gone, which happened within weeks of the departure of the Soviet Union, as soon as they saw that was gone, there was no reason to have two countries. That was the only reason to have an East and West Germany, because of the failed experiment of communism. Well, the same thing is true in North Korea. What I would say,
what I get out of what you're saying is that the people are, in a way, they're imprisoned, and that is what fascinates you. You want to emancipate them somehow. You want to find out what it is there, and you want to be a first-hand observer on what could be a process in the near term that will bring them into the world. Am I right?
Well, it would probably be a little grandiose of me to say that I want to free them, but the synergy is there, and I think they'll get to a tipping point when the army, which is, as in Korea, as in many countries, is a stabilizing and a powerful force. When that gets to the tipping point where they see change as more progressive than staying the same, it will happen because soldiers will not take up arms. That's the same thing that happened at Camp Aguinaldo in the Philippines when the people who had once been loyal to Marcos all of a sudden once said, we're not fighting anymore. And that day, I believe that day will come, and I think people like me are a virus because they can, the government can suggest for as long as they want to that Americans are evil and vile, but every time that I've been there, Americans are forbidden fruit. As soon as they see an American, that's who they want to meet. And that shows an eagerness, that shows a looking past the official explanation, and that is very encouraging. I genuinely enjoy such events as going to the amusement parks where the soldiers are lined up, because they do try to entertain their very young, mostly high school age soldiers who are, when you look at them, they're more like delightful little children than they are some kind of ominous destructive force. And so you go and you have you wave to them and shake hands with them, and you go on the rides, and sometimes I fake being scared out of my gourd, and sometimes I really am. I went on a ride during our last trip that was just hilarious, and I hammed it up and got a few laughs from the youngsters watching me, and shook a few hands and made a few friends. They're nice people, and the reason that I go there is it's multifold. Every time I go there, I feel like I can accomplish one more thing. I think I'm up to the point now where I wouldn't mind being a contact person. So if business people finally decide, you know, let's go there and check it out, who do we talk to just to get a rough idea of what it's like over there? Well, there is somebody here now. And on this trip, another attorney who specializes in immigration wants to go along too, and so there'll be that many more people. And the more people who know about this country, the more people who will be interested in it and not afraid of it. I'm not the least bit fearful of
Well, when you went the
North
first
Korea.
time, you were trying to catch up on, you know, life south of the 38th parallel way back when you were in the Army. But then, you know, there's been a progression in your trips. You've delved a little deeper each time. You've had a more profound experience each time. So what is that progression, and where are you now on this coming fourth trip?
In the first trip, I call that my Neil Armstrong trip, because when I stepped off the airplane, I literally thought, this is one small step for a man and a giant leap for mankind. And I spent that whole also, and that took away a lot of the fear right there, because it was a pleasant experience at the DMZ. In fact, it's more pleasant on the north looking south than it is the reverse.
Why is that?
Because our military people like to make this an important and very dangerous location. Even Bill Clinton, when he went up to the DMZ, said, this is the scariest place on earth. And I have to laugh at that, because it's an interesting place. It's a wonderful living museum of a former war, but I've been a lot more scared in a lot of other places than I have been at the DMZ. It's fascinating. So the first trip was the Neil Armstrong trip, where it was one small step, and I was self-conscious. The second trip was more historical, where I wanted to go to the opposite shore and see Wonsan, Ham Hung, Hung Nam, beautiful places.
That's the west shore.
That's the east shore.
Okay.
Most of the cities in both Koreas are lined up along the west shore, where you have that muddy yellow sea, which you can't do much anything in. And then you have the opposite side, which is on both countries, it's harder to get to, but once you get there, that's where the nice Korean War is. During the retreat from the Chosin Reservoir back in that bitter winter of '51, this is where our troops debarked. In other words, they left the peninsula to safety and then re-entered at a more southerly point to continue the fight. That was as far north as we got into North Korea. After that, we spent the rest of the war defending the south rather than invading the north. So, but these were wonderful historical places, and these are the places where all of our armaments from the mid-50s were left. So when you go to the museums in Pyongyang, you can see the 1950s armaments. It's a wonderful museum.
Locked in amber.
It really doesn't exist anywhere in the South, with the possible exception of maybe the Smithsonian. They don't have anything in South Korea that has the armaments like they have in the North. And I remember one of the trips, I went with an Australian man who was in his 70s, and he had been in the war, so he could say, well, that's a burp gun, and that's a Yak airplane, and that is a MiG-15, and those are all M1 rifles from a previous generation. He could identify all those things, and it really brought it to life for me. So loads of fun.
Okay, continue the progression now.
The third trip was to the Pyongyang International Film Festival, which I wanted to see a little bit about the culture and how they have fun at an adult level. And they had some movies from all over the world. They had one of the best movies I've ever seen was an Iranian movie that had absolutely no politics, nothing about the United States, nothing about Islam, nothing about oil. It was a family story about a mother and two children, and how those two sons, one of them who was emotionally challenged, got to be friends with one another. It was a remarkable and somewhat tearful movie, and I just was astonished at the depth. Saw a French movie, The Women on the Sixth Floor, excellent movie. And I saw, of course, that North Korean movie, which is now played in Honolulu and all over the world. It played in New York just this past week, and that is Comrade Kim Goes Flying. So on my fourth trip, I'm going to join Nicholas Bonner. Nick Bonner is a Brit. The Brits have pretty much the run of North Korea because the British now have diplomatic ties. They have an embassy in Pyongyang. And Nick is a good friend of mine. I met him here in Honolulu, and then I met him again at the show, the Comrade Kim initial showing in Pyongyang. And he has access to the upper reaches of North Korean society. So we're promised better restaurants, more contacts with professionals in North Korea, a trip to the Diplomatic Club, where the expatriates from other countries like Sweden and the other countries that recognize North Korea, where they hang out. So I'm looking for the chance to interview people and find out how the professionals view the experience of living in North Korea and how you get around, how you survive. One day, I hope to be able to give some advice from people who want to travel in North Korea and want to do business deals. I think being the contact person, it's not so much that it's me, it's the point that somewhere in Honolulu, there's somebody who knows what they're talking about when it comes to that country. Because I think that we could take the lead in law, in commerce, in trade. I think there's areas where we could take the lead. But if we want to do it, we have to do it now. We don't wait until after we have normalized relations and then people from New York and Los Angeles have already got the corner on us. We act now.
Well, no, you mentioned that the British have already established diplomatic relations. The British have been very active, globally in that kind of thing. It isn't imperialism; it's diplomacy. And I just wonder how they did that, why they did that. Are you familiar with their entry into North Korea?
In 2000, Tony Blair's Labour government decided to recognize North Korea, and that was after years of some of the same bitter experiences that we had. They fought with us on our side during the Korean War, but Tony Blair felt the time was now to let bygones be bygones and have diplomatic ties. What's fascinating about that, and no one has ever said it in so many words, but in that same year, Bill Clinton sent Madeleine Albright to North Korea, and she had that famous eye-to-eye contact. It turns out she's not a very tall person, but neither was Kim Jong-il. Even with his elevator shoes, they saw eye to eye, and she talked to him and found him to be a very humorous character. And I think that was a trial balloon from the Clinton administration to see if maybe the United States ought to change the policy. Nothing ever came of it because Clinton was within less than a year of his own departure from office, but I've often wondered if he had a couple of years left on his tour of duty and with Vietnam recognition under his belt successfully. It was a diplomatic advance that he made. With that,
you remember, it was after he left office. It was in the middle 2000s.
Yeah.
When these two young women, part of a press organization out of LA, Current.com, I think they call it. They took some cameras and they did what they do all over the world.
Sure.
They were traveling in the area and somehow they were compromised on the Yellow River and they were arrested and they were thrown in jail. One was Lisa Lim, who got very famous over this.
Yeah.
And they were in jail for a year, and Clinton went over there and got them out. And it suggests that Clinton had a special affinity, a special relationship that he was capitalizing on in order to do that, no?
I think he did, but for a character as magnetic as Clinton, for whom a ready smile, a handshake, and a funny opening line are his characteristics. If you look at him, he was poker faced the whole time. He sat a distance away from Kim Jong-il. There was no suggestion of warmth. The matter was handled as best as it could. I think the Obama administration handled it correctly by simply saying that, you know, if the price of freedom for our citizens is sending Bill Clinton or some other famous person over, but not with approval. And Clinton was as dour as I've ever seen him, and as uncommunicative. So he did what was required and nothing more. So he was a loyal diplomat in the sense that he did nothing to encourage them, at least in front of the cameras. You never quite know what Bill Clinton and what basketball players and, you know, are they some kind of back channel to the leadership there? Well, we won't know until history is written 20, 30, 50 years from now. So I can't really tell you, but
you know, we're going to take a break, Pat.
yeah.
That's Patrick Border, a citizen diplomat. We're talking about circling back to North Korea here on the ThinkTech series on Asia in Review. And we're going to find out after this break whether Pat Border is himself a back channel. Okay, we'll be right back.
Well, if I am, I sure as hell wouldn't tell you.
I think I'll turn this off now. Okay, so just regrouping here. Okay, now we know you're going, and I'd like to know the details of that trip and what you expect to find.
Okay. I'll give you what I know.
After we confirm that you have no actual official mission on this trip.
Nothing that I'll admit on camera. I'm a low-level operative. It means they don't pay me, and that pisses me off.
Send them a bill.
Oh, they'll probably knock me off. I don't know.
But you've never actually even had contact with the government over there, right?
Well, with a communist government, who's private? I mean, if everybody's government, then I've had, but you know, if I've had contact with a minister or something like that, or somebody the head of something official and governmental, I don't think so.
Okay. You ready, you guys? Yep.
I'm scared to death.
Funny, you don't show it.
You look relaxed.
It's a good cover.
15, 20 seconds.
That's what happens when you're CIA.
That's where we have to start.
Nice picture. Nice. Okay, we're back. We're live. We're here. We're in ThinkTech and Asia in Review on a given Tuesday. We're circling back to North Korea with Patrick Border citizen diplomat. We certainly enjoy having this discussion with him. As we left it, and hanging, if you will, just before the break, Pat, we're talking about whether you might be a back channel operative in this trip coming up, your 4th trip to North Korea.
Jay, I could be coy and tell you that I'm not at liberty to describe my role, but
Well,
the
you
truth,
have to kill me before you.
but yeah, if I tell you, I have to kill you. That's how it works. But the answer is no. I wouldn't mind if that ever came up. But this is probably as close as I've ever come to a business reason to be there, rather than curiosity and fun. I would say that I'm looking for the infrastructure now. I'd like to find out how the diplomatic group lives. I know that there's some business because I've seen business people come and go. I know that there is a Hong Kong lawyer who actually has a practice set up in North Korea. So there are the rudiments of business there, but not really enough to comprise readily identifiable business. In other words, it's a bit of reconnaissance to find out if I can help other people who go in the future, just to be able to tell them, you know, how do you get around there? What currencies do you use? Who are the people to see? I've already done some assistance to the Hawaii International Film Festival by establishing a contact with their Korean counterpart and hoping to get some of the North Korean movies to Hawaii
That would be
for
very
showing. But serious business, I think I'm just now beginning to leave a few footprints on the moon in that area, and I hope that I can be a resource for other people in the future, because, as I've said, every time an American, every time a Westerner, every time somebody who's not North Korean goes in there, it's a virus. You show them how the outside world operates, and you show them that there's a better way to live, and that is eventually how they'll get to that tipping point where they'll say the unknown is more interesting than it is fearful. And when they do that, the brave new world starts.
Yeah. Well, okay, I'm very interested in how you perceive this to happen. How do you perceive, you know, this is not a government thing. You're only going in sort of on an altruistic level. I mean, I think your whole motivation is altruistic here, to try to bring the places together on a business level. But, you know, you have not had any contact with the government per se. You have not established any diplomatic possibilities. You're merely going in to try to do good, or at least do business. How do you see this unfolding? How long will you be there? What's your agenda?
This will be a short, intense trip. I usually go for a week at a time, so after this trip I'll have spent a total of 25 days there. This is more intense. It's meant to expose the small group of people going in to a more elite group, and to get sort of an inside look at how people who have the contacts, how they go about their business. When I went to the film festival, I went to an entertainment district afterwards for the after party, and it was a place I'd never seen before. So there are a lot of places in Pyongyang where more business-oriented people are entertained and do their work, and I'm doing this as a little bit of reconnaissance. It corresponds to my natural curiosity about the country. In other words, if there wasn't a dollar to be made, I'd probably still do it anyway, and I wouldn't mind earning a buck as much as the next guy. But if I never earned anything from it, I have a very strong sense that I'd just like to be an intermediary. I'd like to do whatever I can to help these people emerge from what has been a very dark existence.
Yeah.
And it's fun to do it. The people are lovable, and I distinguish between the people and the government. And, you know, one of the most interesting people, I know if you watch the CBS Evening News historically, one of the people who was their lead anchor was a guy named Bob Schieffer. During the Bush administration, his brother John Schieffer was our ambassador to Japan. And John had some very interesting remarks about North Korea. He likened the leadership there to the Soprano crime family, a group that is very small, has their own interests at heart, and that's good news, because the narrower the base of the communist regime, the more possible it is to topple it peacefully. You know, I like to think that these people are probably establishing their gold reserves in Switzerland now, because I believe with all the casting about they had to come up with young Kim Jong-un, that he was the last resort for them. They didn't have anybody else. They needed a brand name to keep the Kim name going, and so they found him. He obviously has no pedigree. He has no exploits against the Japanese or the Americans or anybody. He probably speaks better French than he does Korean, and he's definitely a temp and the last resort.
Your whole approach on this, though, I mean, trying to foment a little business, it's based on an optimistic view of the future of the country. It's based on this emergence you talk about. It's based on the thought that somewhere along here, and we can talk about the timeline, somewhere along here, was it 2, 5, 10 years, whatever it is, there's going to be a flowering, there's going to be a great connection, and we are already somehow on that road. So that this would be a very exciting time, just the beginning, you know, of the business connections knitting up between North Korea and the U.S. and other Western countries. I can see how excited you might be about that.
I am, and I believe that what is paradoxical about the Koreas, and it has been for most of the existence of both countries, with the exception of the sunshine period of Kim Dae-jung and Roh Moo-hyun. Those are the two South Korean presidents who went to North Korea. Except for that, and including the recently ex-president Lee Myung-bak, and now Park Geun-hye, who is the daughter of Park Chung-hee, those people have had very little interest. The current generation of Koreans born well after the war was over, the people in their 40s now who have never seen the more serious effects of the war, see North Korea as an abstraction. North Korea might as well be the next planet out after Neptune. That's how they see it. It's a mild threat. It's sort of the way that the Israelis would see Jordan. It's a vaguely ominous country that has nothing good in mind for them, but otherwise it's an abstraction. It's the North Koreans who desperately want to have reunification. They keep bringing it up. They keep building the monuments to it, and they're the ones who are interested in it. And I think I believe that Park Geun-hye could be she could turn out to be the Nixon who goes to North Korea. When Nixon went to China, nobody expected it. The State Department didn't know anything about it. Nixon went, and it was the week that changed the world. And our relations with China haven't always been smooth. They're not smooth now. But the world is different on account of that trip, and we have much more valuable insights. And I think that a kind of living arrangement that is non-warlike could be arranged if a person of Park Geun-hye's pedigree could strike a deal with the North Koreans.
How would that work?
Just for civility. Well, both sides are wasting enormous resources on armaments. The South Koreans are armed to the teeth, which is why the North Koreans would never invade. North Korea is aware from the Gulf War that we have the bunker busters and the cruise missiles, that without putting a single boot in North Korea, we could reduce Pyongyang to Hiroshima, which would be a tragedy. But they know we can do it. And I think now we know we can do it, and there's no hiding it. So the chance of invasion is flat zero, and talk of it is non-productive. There's no reason why North Korea that wants reunification wants to make a lake of fire and salt, no matter what the diplomats and the military people say. So what our successive administrations have learned is to underreact to all the vituperation and all the threats and the stuff that goes down to hitting Hawaii and Alaska and North America. It's not going to happen. The North Koreans have demonstrated that when it comes to just about any form of militarism, including their missiles, that they are the diplomatic and military equivalent of Wile E. Coyote. Everything that they launch blows up in their face. They've never come anywhere close to threatening, except by accident. You know, when they shoot a missile off and it lands in the South China Sea and threatens the safety of shipping and threatens the safety of people in the Philippines, well, that's a threat of sorts, but it's more a threat of a drunk driver than it is of an intentional, capable invader. So they're a joke, and I think we should not overreact to them. And of course, you know, on our side, the more extreme elements and the people who want more funding for the Department of Defense, they have an excuse every time the North Koreans fly off the handle. But this time we underreacted, and what looked in February and March like it was a major disaster about to happen is not even on the radar screen now. It's not to the point where people consciously perceive any risk from North Korea at all, and that's a more realistic approach.
Actually, Obama has done a pretty good job in keeping the lid on things. He hasn't overreacted, and he's seen it in
I think that's true.
You know, a sort of in an analytic way, in a way where he's not getting sucked into negotiations that work against him. So, to his credit, because North Korea has been pretty good at trying to intimidate and provoke, and he hasn't been provocable.
See, here's the history of that in brief. In 1994, the Clinton administration did not object when former President Jimmy Carter went over in February of 1994, in the last 2 months of Kim Il-sung's life, and tried privately to strike a deal which was not sanctioned by the Clinton administration. That's where you got into those light water reactors, where what Carter said is, we'll provide you with coal and light water reactors if you will disassemble your heavy water reactors, the kind that produce nuclear fissionable material.
He was out of his depth, wasn't he?
Well, he wasn't authorized to act, and the Clinton administration was furious when they realized what he'd done. The problem is, in order to undo it, they had to give certain concessions in order to prevent bad behavior. And that's where we got into this cycle of rewarding bad behavior. Every time the North Koreans flew off the handle, we would pay them to shut up,
and they
basically,
have
and
continued
behave.
that for their own benefit.
And
I want to take a short break, Pat.
Okay.
That's Patrick Border, citizen diplomat. We're here on ThinkTech. We're talking Asia in Review, and the title of our show is Circling Back to North Korea with a citizen diplomat, and that's very important. And after the break, Pat, I would really like to talk to you about the differentiation of the three elements. That is, war between the Koreas, unification between the Koreas, and doing business with the West. I'd like to know the relationship of those three things as you see it going forward. We'll take a short break. We'll be right back. Is that a fair question?
Oh, I'm punting now. I mean, this is five-star bullshit, but I'll give you what I got.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, because you're talking about all three.
Okay.
and how does it settle out, and what really will happen first? And is there a connection between reunification and business with the West, and which one will happen before the other one? I suspect that your trip will have more of an effect. I think the way it goes is your trip and the trips of many others will have an effect on business, but not necessarily unification.
I think you're right.
And maybe business comes first.
Anything that's normal behavior encourages diplomatic ties eventually. The British went cold turkey, and they provided us with some leadership and an example. I mean, it's interesting. Tony Blair just said, well, we're going to do it. And he got enough people to go along that the Queen's picture is now in the embassy in Pyongyang. It's an amazing thought.
It's a benefit economically, isn't it? I mean, they have
for them,
first dibs.
they have the run of the country.
Yeah.
The tour groups that I've been going with, the British tour groups, always go wherever they want. They were the first to get to the eastern half of the country. They're now going to Sinwiju, which is it's the first point in North Korea from Russia. Sinwiju was what they called it MiG Alley, because that was where the MiGs came down. and they would retreat back into Russia, and we couldn't chase them because they would be out of our reach.
We're going to talk about Russia here. Okay, we're going back. Yeah. We're here, we're live, we're ThinkTech with Patrick Porter, citizen diplomat, who is soon enough going to be circling back to North Korea. And I wanted to get your take on the three legs, the three possibilities that we were talking about before the break. That is unification, the possibility of war-type contention between North and South, and the possibility of improving business relations. And I suggest to you that reunification and business are actually two separate tracks. It's like looking across the other way, and one may have a secondary effect on the other, but they don't necessarily move in lockstep.
I think you're absolutely right. If you remember, one of the most inspirational monuments that I saw, I showed you a photo of during one of our earlier soirees where we got together, and the photo is of two women in stone who are reaching across the highway toward the goal of reunification.
Great irony. It really is.
It really is, because it's such a peaceful monument in the midst of such warlike rhetoric. But what I believe is that the chances, of course, we already have some commerce. It's off again, on again. But in the ancient city of Kaesong, you have, of course, the South Koreans have an industrial park there. For the moment, it's shut down, but it'll be up and running again as soon as the North Koreans realize that there's no hay they can make out of keeping it closed. As soon as they turn it back on again, you've got commerce, and they've made really strong steps in the past years over what things were like before. So a lot of people in North Korea are employed for South Korean companies. So you have some commerce going on now, and there'll be more of it. As for reunification, I think the North has to cave in. In other words, their economics have to be to such a deplorable state that no one is on the gravy train. The government simply cannot provide, even for the military, for whom they provide first and foremost. And as soon as that gravy train, I would call it, shuts down, you're going to have people who are looking elsewhere, i.e. overseas, for a new life. And when they get to a level of poverty, after all, they're letting people like me in. I mean, if I was them, I wouldn't let me in, because I represent the worst of Americanism in their view, and yet all I have to do in order to make up lost ground is to exceed expectations. As long as I don't travel around the countryside eating little children, I've
Why
succeeded.
did they let you in?
They let me in because they need my greenbacks. They need hard currency, and I provide it for them, and to that extent, I suppose I'm propping up a regime. But when I go to the tour guides and I tip them, then I'm giving some of the have-nots some of the finer things in life, because if the tour guides have hard currency, which means euros or dollars or Chinese yuan in that order, if they have those things, they can go into the department stores and buy, a can of instant coffee or some of the real fineries. Without that, they can't do it. So I'm a virus. What I do is persuade people that there's a better life outside of what they have. So if I buy them a Brooks Brothers shirt or a Western style necktie, something like that, or a cashmere sash, for, a cashmere scarf for the women against the cold of the Korean winters, that earns points, and it gives people, it plays to people's imaginations of a better life.
It's a big message, huge message, and it leaves an impression that lasts forever.
I hope so.
But you have various factors working, and I wanted to, in this part of the show, I wanted to sort of catch the dynamic that you have seen over your trips about how things are progressing, and try to identify the factors that are moving North Korea into this emergence, this transformational moment which could happen any time. What is out there that is pushing it one way or the other?
Well, the first thing is sheer desperation. The North Korean regime has so many sanctions against it. They can't have any banking transactions at all. So it's desperation. They tried for a while counterfeiting U.S. $100 bills, and then the Treasury
It's a job.
they clamped down on them by basically making them off limits to legitimate banks. So if a legitimate bank does business with North Korea and starts floating counterfeit currency, then they're off limits. And that had a very powerful impact on the banks in Macau. So that shuts off a line of commerce, albeit subterranean and illegal, but commerce nonetheless, with the North Korean government. And every time a sanction applies, the more loudly they protest, the more it's having an effect. That's the great part about it. We do have the power of sanctions, as other countries do, and that makes them desperate. So they're desperate for hard currency, and that's why tourism is a form that they've turned to. And the British people, through whom I travel, have the run of the country. They can go practically anywhere.
But they're not the only ones. I mean, I may take a wild guess and say there are other European countries who have also established ties with North Korea, and I'll guess and say, for business purposes, I'll say Germany. Am I right?
I don't know about Germany. I think Italy has. I know Sweden has, because the U.S. interests are taken care of by the Swedish embassy. So I'm always told if I have a medical emergency, I go to the Swedish embassy, and they arrange for the evacuation. I have insurance, and so they would arrange to have the plane come in and take me out and take me to one of the other Asian locales where I would get good health care. So those things are possible. Reunification, I think it's closer. In 1987, Steve Forbes wrote an article in Forbes magazine saying that the Soviet Union would break up, and everyone scoffed at him and thought he was a gadfly. And then, of course, 2 years later, the wall came down, and 3 years after that, Mikhail Gorbachev handed over the keys to Boris Yeltsin, and the Soviet Union was history, and it all happened
So
without a shot
quickly.
being fired. So these people, the Philippines, the Romanians, the East Germans, the Poles, and we all remember Solidarity. Well, that worked famously, and so all these countries had peaceful transitions, and no one predicted it. That's what's so refreshing about the whole thing. When these things happen, they don't happen gradually; they happen suddenly, and I believe that there's some cause for belief that events could happen much quicker than we imagine.
It's a tipping point kind of thing.
It's very much the tipping point. Malcolm Gladwell had it perfectly stated, and it's shown up so much in diplomacy and the transformation of countries.
So what's pushing in the tipping point? What are the? I know this is a hard question, but what is building up under there
Okay.
that could pop the tipping
Okay,
point?
here's what happens. It's the realization on the part of the average citizen that there's a better life out there. I've heard so many North Koreans acknowledge that the life in the South is so much better. They know it. Nobody pretends otherwise. And so it's that expectation. It's that hope for a better future on their side. It's the fact that the government is increasingly in a decaying orbit. They have less and less and less to give their people, and more go to the elites, the people on the inside who have the privileges. So you've got those functions working at the same time that, and I enjoy this part enormously, their million-man army is a bunch of high school kids. And I don't care what the CIA or anybody else says, because I don't have to look from 30,000 feet up or 30 miles up from a satellite. I see it on the ground. They're wonderful kids. You don't know whether to, give them a piece of candy or pat them on the head and give them a kiss. They're delightful young kids, but that's all they are. And so this army that's going to devastate the South is non-existent. I don't believe it. I haven't seen it, and I've been there on so many trips down to the DMZ and the flat part of the peninsula in between the two Koreas, and there's no place to put an army base.
That's the internal. What about the external? I mean, you know that people, countries come in and try to foment unrest or foment good results. But they always try to get a hand in things. I mean, just as the U.S. would like to see certain results in North Korea, Russia would like to see certain results, and China would like to see certain results, and South Korea, for example, Japan, others.
You're right.
What are
You're
these
right.
guys
well,
doing?
all their motivations are different.
Yeah.
Okay. First of all, the Chinese have no desire to see a détente between the two Koreas, because that is the same problem Mao had during the Korean War. He didn't want U.S. troops sitting on his border. And if there is a rapprochement, a warming of relations, then we pretty much know that U.S. policy is not to withdraw the troops, but it would be a lot easier for them to maybe have access, and the border between the two Koreas would become more porous. So the Chinese are almost desperate in their fear, which is why you get ambivalence and double-mindedness and not a whole lot of active cooperation. The Japanese don't particularly like having missiles lobbed over them as part of the test, and they had that happen once. So they have every reason to want to have any nuclear threat minimized and eliminated. The Russians, at least during this period of time, Putin seems to, whatever we want, he doesn't want. So they seem to be wanting to limit U.S. power wherever it outcrops. And so I think that his desires would be to promote confusion and ambiguity, so he's not anxious to have people getting warm and fuzzy between the two Koreas. As for every other country in the world, they'd be just as happy to have the matter over. It's a totally baffling battle between these two countries. And as for the South Koreans, that is a tough nut to crack, because for most of the younger people, North Korea is an abstraction. They see it like the Germans see it. The West Germans had to pay for the reunification. In West to East Germany, for every East German worker, there were 3 West Germans who could pay for the reunification with the 4th German. In Korea, that number's different. It's 2 to 1. So there's only 2 Koreans to pay for every 1 North Korean, and they see it as a major deprivation, which is why you won't find anybody who's chomping at the bit to reunify with North Korea. And that's sad, because the synergy that you could come up with if the two countries put together, they both have what each other needs. The South Koreans have resources, they have food, because the breadbasket of the country is in the south, where, you know, sea to shining sea, they've got wheat fields and rice fields, and it's beautiful in the autumn. In the north, it's, you know, 85% of it is mountains, and what little plantings they have are so small that in a room no larger than the studio might be a cornfield or a rice field, because they have to use whatever space is available, and so they lose the advantage of mechanized agriculture. So the end result is they both have what the other needs: light minerals that could be mined from the mountains of North Korea, could bring wealth to both sides. The food
Pat, we're
from
going
the
to take
south.
a short break.
Okay.
That's Pat Porter, citizen diplomat, and I mean that in the fullest sense. Circling back to North Korea here in his 4th trip coming up soon. And we're at ThinkTech Hawaii. We're talking about Asia in review. And when we come back, we're going to try to integrate all these factors and get some real predictions from Pat about what's going to happen in the next few years, okay? We're going to stop out with step 1 and go to step 2 right after this break. Stay right there. Step 1, by the way, is opening Kaesong. What do you think?
Oh, you mean Kaesong, the city of Kaesong, and
Yeah,
opening
that
up
was
that
really silly
industrial.
what he did with that. I mean, that was like shooting yourself in the foot.
Yeah, but that's all they have. They've been shooting themselves in the foot for a good many years. I mean, what is gained by bombing and blowing up and killing the entire South Korean cabinet? And that happened in 1987.
Who did that, the father?
No, the son. He went down to Burma, where Chun Du-hwan carried half of his cabinet, all of his cabinet, and they wiped out, I don't know, 2/3 of his cabinet. They killed him in a bombing in in Burma.
That's just bad temper.
It's stupid. It's just not having that dipshit around anymore is a wonderful thing. You know, do you realize that when Kim Jong-il died, so few people mourned that they had party people out saying, "You should be tearful. The great leader is the dear leader, the mucky muck is dead."
Terrible
you know?
cultural thing there. Was it, David Day found some footage on this where some woman had been blind. Did you see this footage?
No.
Some woman had been blind and they gave her an eye operation and of course was
Oh,
questioned.
yes, I saw that. Where,
And-
you know, the people who came in were from a third country, and she said, "Oh, thank you, Kim Jong-il, for restoring my
Yeah.
sight," as if he had fuck all to do with it.
Right,
Yeah.
right. But I mean, that's why did she have to do that? Did she have to do that?
I
Maybe
don't.
she had
You
to
know
do
what?
that.
You know what? Yeah, I think those people said, be sure to give credit where it's due, and when the party official tells you that, that's what you do. See, that's why whenever the Koreans have big shows, when the South Korean students went to the Myeongdong Cathedral and protest against the government, it's all wonderfully choreographed. Koreans are phenomenal at
Sure.
choreographing, you know, where they're rah, rah, rah,
Flags
you know,
and
yeah, everything. And it's all in a unison that you marvel at. So when they do it up in the north, it doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean they're enthusiastic for the regime. It means they
It's
want
kabuki.
their next handout. It's kabuki theater.
Okay, David? All right, let's go back. We got like 6 or 7 minutes here. How fast the time goes. It's how fast the time goes in the world, I'll say, for everything. That's the remarkable thing.
I think the North Koreans would like it to go a little faster.
I think that's true. We should talk about that. Okay, this is Patrick Borders, a citizen diplomat par excellence, circling back to North Korea on his coming 4th trip. And here we're going to talk with him. We are talking with him on ThinkTech, the series of ThinkTech, and we're talking in Asia in Review today on a given Tuesday. And Pat, I'd like to get, in our final segment here, I'd like to sort of tie the loose ends together and ask you, given all that we've talked about, what is going to happen? What's the first thing, the second thing, and the third thing? And what are the risks? I mean, this could all go down the side, couldn't it?
Yes, it's possible. Things could go for the worst. Based on our collective experience in the world with totalitarian regimes, I don't think that's going to happen. And I think there are enough examples where these regimes cave in on their own. There was a time until the 1980s when a barter community called the Warsaw Pact existed, and North Korea was a part of that. And you and I have talked about that Hotel of Doom, the Ryugyong Hotel, which is a perfect example of the loss of that bartering organization, that sort of opposite number to NATO. The Soviets used to provide the North Koreans with a subsidy. And in 1986, young Kim Jong-il goes to his daddy and says, "I'd like to build a big hotel, and I'd like to have big restaurants in it, and we'd like to have a nice fancy rooms in it, and we'd like to have storefronts at the entry level so that businesses can have a place to do business." Well, the problem you have with that, first of all, forget the construction for a minute. The problem you have with that is there aren't any businesses in North Korea, so there's no one to occupy the storefronts. The hotel is so expensive, would have been so expensive, that no North Korean would have been able to afford to stay in the hotel anyway. And this gargantuan, it looks like an upside down ice cream cone. It's a cone that stretches up to the sky, and it's clearly the tallest building in the otherwise stately city of Pyongyang.
Mm-hmm.
It's never been occupied. The concrete was laid in 1986, and then from that point, because the Soviet subsidy stopped, they simply left the building where it was, along with all the effects of weathering that would cause spalling and freezing and thawing and wet and dry and all the things that would basically ruin a concrete building and make the rebar rust and make it very unstable. And the building's been sitting out since that time. And about 2 years ago, the poor people from Egypt an Egyptian company got the contract to lay all the telephone lines in the country, but as a part of that agreement, they agreed to glass in the Hotel of Doom, which means, okay, now it has glass in it, and this thing is monstrously large. They've got restaurants that are the size of 5 and 6 football fields.
What does this signify? I mean, we're coming to the end, and I want to get a handle on what you think is going to happen.
What I think is going to happen is that North Korea will at some point cave in under its own weight. Some people would say that's naive. I say not. I know I heard John Bolton, that temporary UN ambassador, the temporary appointment that Bush made, and the Senate wouldn't confirm him. And he says everybody who believes that we're not being played by the North Koreans are all suckers. So there are people out there that think I'm as naive as can be. But the difference between me and Mr. Bolton and a lot of other people that have an opinion is I've been there, and I intend to continue to educate myself more and more, because I believe that this great tragedy can end peacefully, and that it can end in such a way that there can be a unification. 10, 20 years, I don't know. I wish I could say, but I hope that rescue is forthcoming for the great people of North Korea, because they are an imprisoned island, just like President Kennedy identified Cuba as being, and they are not responsible for the nuttiness, the stupidity, the violence that happens in North Korea and around the world.
And the one thing you can do, that you do have some control over, the one thing that you can contribute to this is creating a little business with the United States. And that is a notable contribution.
I hope so, because I believe that it's regrettable, but if you look at the history of the Korean Peninsula, the United States of America is as responsible as any country on this planet for the plunder and the division of the two Koreas. And after the Russo-Japanese War, the Treaty of Portsmouth, which was arranged by and mediated by President Teddy Roosevelt, they basically stole the sovereignty of the Kingdom of Korea and gave it to Japan as a colony. 36 years later, the war is over. We have really the run of the Far East, but we decide to be friends with the Russians and let them accept the surrender of the Japanese north of the 38th parallel, which essentially surrendered the northern half of the country to communism. And I don't think we had to do that. I think we had enough cooperation.
We got to leave it there, Pat.
Yeah.
But what I take out of it is the fact that we have a kind of noblesse oblige obligation, and now is the time for us to see that and play it out. Thank you so much, Pat, for coming down.
Thank
Patrick
you.
Border, citizen diplomat, circling back to Korea here on ThinkTech. Thank you, Pat. Let's do it again when you come back.
Okay.
Aloha, everybody. Okay. We're off the microphone. Sorry, the practicalities.
I
you gotta
never
finish,
know
we
that
gotta-
stuff. I figured, this is just the time when I'll
It's
do
okay.
something, make some faux pas.
No. That's you're so full of information about that stuff. And all of
People,
it-
there's a
all
lot of
it is
people that say,
relevant.